Just bring us back to reality?
Yeah, because everything is amazing right now, and nobody's happy. Like, in my lifetime, the changes in the world have been incredible. When I was a kid, we had a rotary phone. We had a phone that you had to stand next to, and you had to dial it.
Yes.
You realize how primitive? You're making sparks in a phone, and you actually would hate people with zeros in their numbers because it was more like, oh, this guy's got 2 zeros. Screw that guy. Why do I want to? Yeah. And then if they called and you weren't home, the phone would just ring lonely by itself.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you? Yeah. I was on an airplane, and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane, and they go, open up your laptop. You can go on the internet. And it's fast, and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down. And they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, this is bull. Like, how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
And on planes, flying is the worst one, because people come back from flights and they tell you their story. And it's like a horror story. They're like, it was the worst day of my life. First of all, we didn't board for 20 minutes. Right. And then we get on the plane, and they made us sit there on the runway for 40 minutes. We had to sit there. Oh, really? What happened next? Did you fly through the air incredibly like a bird? Did you partake in the miracle of human flight, you non-contributing zero, that you got to fly? You're flying! It's amazing. Everybody on every plane should just constantly be going, oh my God! Wow!
Yes!
You're flying. You're sitting in a chair in the sky.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
All right. Anyone ever seen that one before? I'd seen it before. So yeah, that one's funny. It rings true. It was recorded in 2008, more than 10 years ago. The first iPhone had just come out. So how do you think we've done with relating to our technology in the last decade? Have we gotten any better? I think it still rings pretty true. What would it even look like to get better at relating to our technology? So we've been in a series on relating. And if you've been here this summer, we've hit different primary relationships in our lives, like relating to our church, relating to our families. And today we're talking about relating to technology. And so for today, our definition of technology is going to be pretty simple. It's anything that humans create, anything we create that extends or amplifies our abilities. So that's pretty general. So anything that enables us to do more, accomplish more than we would have otherwise. So that's technology. So it's in a way, it's a tool. It's like a hammer, right? So this is technology. It's a pretty simple piece of technology. But if you need it, it's pretty powerful. So technology can be used for great good, but it also can be misused. If I'm hitting a nail, this is pretty great. If I'm hitting a screw, not near as great. If I'm hitting a person, much worse, right? There's a law for that. All right, so technology can be used and misused. A saw, really helpful if you need it, but you can misuse it. You've seen this picture before in one of my messages. That one is terrifying. So if you misuse tools, sometimes it just doesn't work well. Other times it can cause great damage, as apparently is about to happen in this picture. So technology has great power for good, great power for destruction. And I think we all kind of inherently know this. So the question as we start out and as we're going to talk about engaging with, relating to technology, the question can't primarily be, is technology good or bad? Right? That can't be the real question. Because technology, at least at a base level, is pretty neutral. It's what we use it for that would be good or bad. And so another thing I kind of realized is that relating to technology is the first topic in this series where we're talking about relating to something that's not a relational entity by nature. What does it mean to relate to a hammer? Does this speak to you? Is this speaking to you? It does to a few of you guys. That's right. Does it speak? Does this have an agenda? Right? Does it have an agenda? Does it care whether you pick it up and use it or not? I doubt it. But increasingly, our sophisticated technology is talking to us. And it's usually speaking to us in a female voice, sometimes with a British accent, if you check that option. And it's dinging desperately for our attention. So things are changing with technology. So increasingly, we can relate in a way with our technology, and it affects the way we relate with others. And so for today, we're talking about technology, that's a little bit general. So one of the most novel and influential pieces of technology, I think, in our lives today is this. It's a smartphone. This is not the latest one. It's not big enough, doesn't have the little thing. There's a little crack right here. You can ask Jen about how that happened. But our smartphones, I think, this is probably the most useful way to talk about technology. So let's see, what did I find here? Latest research from Pew talked about how 81% of Americans, no matter their socioeconomic status, no matter what, owns a smartphone. So vast majority of us own smartphones now. And if you get to young folks, 18 to 30-year-olds, we're up to 96%. So everyone has a smartphone. And tethered to them in some way, it's never too far away. It's in our pockets. Our jeans usually have a little box right here. Our purses have that special little spot. It's never too far away. Never too far away. And I think never before in the history of technology has one piece of tech been so central. The central point for so many of our wants and needs, they all funnel in right here. I think it is unique. And if you hold down the button, it'll talk to you. And it'll ask you, what do you need? Oh, that's kind of interesting. So increasingly, we do need to learn how to relate to our smartphones, our phones. So that's how we're going to kind of narrow in today. Most of us, even if we don't have a smartphone, have some sort of a mobile device. I think this will be increasingly true. So tonight, we're going to look specifically at relating to our phone. Even more specifically, how should you be relating to your phone? And contrary to what some of us may think, for that kind of important question, we have to turn to our Bibles. Our Bibles actually have a lot to say to us on this important topic. So before we do that, let's pray again. Let's pray again. Let's ask God to help us. All right, Jesus, my prayer is that you would help us to consider how your word actually does speak to us about how we should use our technology and our phones. I mean, that's going to be my goal. My hope is that you talk to us and you talk through me to us, and that you empower and you invigorate and you really use this time for great good in our lives. We assume that you want to speak to us. So I'm going to assume that, and I'm going to beg that you do. I pray that you would keep any forces that would want to keep us distracted from this topic that I think actually is pretty timely and important for us. Pray that you would keep those distractions away so that we can hear your word clearly and to consider rightly what you might be trying to tell us. All right, so for the rest of you guys, would you just take a few minutes, or a few seconds here to pray that God would speak to you tonight on this topic? All right, Lord, we're going to trust that you will answer those prayers. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so as we talk about this topic, we need some sort of objective standard to talk about this. Otherwise, it's just going to be what I think or what our culture thinks. So much is possible, right? So much is possible. So it can't just be, is it possible? And if it's possible, it's good or okay. That's, in many ways, that's kind of the way that our culture kind of answers this question. What's good? Well, if it can happen, it's probably good. So much is possible. Technology is advancing so quick. I mean, I'm not that old, but I existed in a time before personal computers, before cell phones, definitely before smartphones, before the Internet of Things that now connects even our fridges to everything in our lives. So technology is just ramping up. So much is now possible through our modern tech and through our smartphones, right? So much is possible, but the Apostle Paul reminds us in the letter to 1 Corinthians, in chapter 6 and in chapter 10, he reminds us that even though something's possible, doesn't necessarily mean that it's good or beneficial. And just because something is permissible or allowed doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for us or that it won't enslave us. So we have to think deeply about these things. Is it possible to be enslaved by our phones? Is that even crazy talk? Or is that just crazy talk? Is it possible? All right. For these, like I said, we have to turn to the Bible. So the Bible is our foundation for everything we talk about in here. Everything. The Bible is going to be our foundation. For fundamental questions about like what's right and what's wrong, what's good or what's bad, what's the purpose of things, including the things we create. Tonight we're going to focus in on something that Jesus told his disciples in John 15. So the book of John, fourth book of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's most of the way to the right. If you've got your light blue ESV Bibles at the edge of your pews there, John 15, that one's going to be on page 326. Nope, 526. 526. So we're going to be in John 15, verse 5. And see if you can pick out as we read this, how does this relate to us using our phones? All right, we're going to read verse 5. Jesus tells his disciples, they're talking about life and what matters and what's important. And he says to them, I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. All right, there's nothing about iPhones in there. I know, you didn't miss it. There's nothing about iPhones. But this actually has a ton to teach us about how we should use the technology in our lives, how we should use our phones. See if you can pick some of it out. So Jesus says, I am the vine. He's using a metaphor here, yeah? Grapes and the vine, something they would have been familiar with. He says, I am the vine. I am the source. You guys, you are the branches. I am the vine. I'm the source of all of your life. And that all of life is about resting in me. The vine is the source. So he says, abide in me. If you abide in me, that's good. So abide means living and resting in this real rich way. Living and resting, living and resting. Abide. So Jesus is telling us that life is about living and resting in him and bearing fruit for the blessing of others. So that means that everything in our life has to fit this standard. These are the goals, including how we use our phones, including our technology. So let's think about this as we think about our phones. So Jesus is essentially telling us our phones should lead us to more deeply connect with and abide in Jesus. Everything in our life should. That's what's good. Life is about that. Our phones should help us more deeply abide in Jesus and produce fruit for the blessing of others. So what's good fruit? I'm so glad you asked. What's good fruit? So good fruit, good works. What should come through our lives? What should our phones help? Well, for that, we're going to turn to one more passage. We're going to go to Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5. We're going to start in verse 22. So Galatians, that's 566 in these green or light blue Bibles. Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 22. So this is the Apostle Paul talking to a church, answering a similar question, addressing a similar issue. What's important in our lives? What should our lives produce and look like? So we're going to start in verse 22. I got to find it here. All right, 22, here we are. But the fruit of the Spirit, that's the Spirit of God working through our lives. This is the fruit that should come through the Spirit working through our lives. It should be joy, or love, joy, and peace. Patience. You've probably heard this at a wedding or something like that. Sometimes we've got it up on our walls. See if you can hear it afresh, for this is our checklist for the things that our phones should help us do. It's true. Our phones should help us produce more love. and joy and peace and patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So our technology amplifies what's in us, and it amplifies the things we're going after. And so our phone should amplify the stuff on this list. And to drive home the point, we took this one slightly out of order. He said it first. To drive home the point, he counters this, he contrasts this with the fruit of the flesh, the works of the flesh. So our sinful hearts want to produce something too, and our technology can amplify that. And he says this is the kind of fruit that our sinful hearts want to produce. The works of the flesh, now in verse 19, so works and fruit, we use them interchangeably here. The works of the flesh are evident. Sexual immorality and impurity and sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissension, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. It's a pretty raw list. It's pretty raw. But our hearts, the sinful parts of our hearts, want to do these. And our technology can amplify that too. Do our phones help us do these? I think they sure can. All right, so our tools amplify what's in us. They amplify what's possible. So we have to consider carefully, how do our phones interact with these lists? How do they enable or amplify these things, these two different kinds of fruit? And so we're going to just kind of stack them up here. We've got two of the new iPhones. We're going to put on one of them the fruit of the Spirit, on the other one the fruit of the flesh. So the fruit of the Spirit looks great. It's got those grapes in there. Those look like they'd be wonderful to eat. Over here, that's fruit, but it's pretty rotten. I don't want to eat that. It's pretty nasty. All right, so the fruit of the Spirit and the fruit of the flesh, let's stack them up, like I said, and we'll use them to evaluate the effects of our phones in our lives. So we're not going to hit every one of these, but we're going to choose a few. And as you do, or as we read these, consider, do your phones push you towards one of these? Let's start with self-control and drunkenness at the bottom of the list. Self-control, does your phone help you with self-control? It sure can. Or drunkenness. So our cell phones don't help us get drunk necessarily, but drunkenness is the opposite of being out of control. It's being in control. It's being out of control, being influenced by something beyond yourself. And drunkenness over time leads to addiction, right? Leads to addiction. So we see these effects from our phones. To be sure, all you have to do is just read a few articles online, and you can just see study after study after study about how we are increasingly addicted. I should just keep this out. To our phones. We are increasingly addicted. This one's not even contested. At a basic level, we're increasingly addicted to social media through our phones, especially distractions from our phones. Some even label it zombification. Some places are even putting up warning signs. Warning, folks may get hit by a car because they're looking at their phones. And I like this picture. It was maybe staged, but that girl's on her phone. Yeah, they're starting to put up signs. No one looks up anymore. If you go around K-State campus, if you walk around, what are folks doing? Yeah, they're doing this. I do that sometimes when I'm walking. No one's looking up anymore. You go to lunch together, maybe with friends or folks from work. More often than not, you look around and, it would never be you at your table, but you'll probably see someone at their table and everyone's doing this, right? Again, it would never be you. At home, increasingly. And this one's actually, for whatever reason, when I was getting to this point, this one started to get me worked up a little bit. This is increasingly the picture in our homes. And our kids are just sitting there. Or worse, they've got their own mobile devices. Is that a good thing? Is this a picture of human flourishing? So increasingly, daddy-son time is taken up by addictions to our phones. And our kids are just sitting there. Mommy-daughter time, mommy's addicted to her phone. Has that ever happened to someone you've seen? Increasingly, family time looks like being addicted together individually by ourselves with our phones or mobile devices. we are increasingly addicted to amusement that our phones can give us. So whether it's Netflix or something like that, we always want to be amused. So I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but you have like just a second's free time. And all of a sudden, I'm reaching out with my phone and I'm scrolling. I didn't even think about it. Actually, I stopped playing with my kids. Why did I do that? It's because I'm addicted in some way to my phone and to the amusement that it creates. Who knows what the word amusement means? Amuse. Break it down. Who remembers like high school English class? Means without, and muse means thought. So it literally is trying to help us to be addicted to being thoughtless, without thought. I think it's been somewhat successful. We're addicted to our notifications, our like buttons, the affirmation we get through our social media. It leads us increasingly to things that it leads us increasingly to things that can dominate our lives. Lizzie taught me this phrase not long ago. It was called FOMO. I'd never heard of this, but now everyone has it, right? Fear of missing out. If you're not connected on your phone, if you're not constantly up to date with what that ding was or scrolling on social media, you're going to miss out on something. And so, there's studies that show how this actually makes us freaked out inside. It really has a noticeable effect on us. FOMO, it's real. The irony is that our FOMO makes us actually miss out on the things that are happening in our lives, around us, with real people. All right. I think you get the picture. So, do our phones push us more towards addiction and being controlled, or towards self-control? Good question. Let's look at another pair. Patience and kindness versus jealousy and envy and rivalry. How do our phones affect us here? So, let's see. I think I got out of order here on my notes. So our phones, they push us through social media. Social media is kind of built on the platform, I think, essentially, of comparing yourself to others, right? It's kind of the root. It's kind of the foundation. So the whole thing is built on my ability and my desire to compare myself to others. I want to put my best Instagram face forward, find the perfect filter, get all the zits out of there. The background is perfectly blurred, just like I had a really expensive camera. I put my best moments out there. I'm not crying, I'm smiling, right? Everything is going well, my kids are behaving. Look how good of a life I have. And so when you get on your social media, on your phone, and you're putting that post up, why do you do that? I think we're desperately trying to find some sort of approval from others through comparison. You put up something and you're constantly checking, how many likes did I get? Did other people like it? Now, you might not consciously be thinking through this every time, but I think we are desperately trying to seek approval and status from others through comparison. But there's a problem there's a problem with this. It's never going to work. Yeah, you might get some likes, but ultimately everyone's doing the same thing. And so you're a group of ticks and no dog, right? It's not going to work. And so I think you probably have experienced this, even when you put up a post that you like, it doesn't really satisfy, or that other people like, it doesn't really satisfy, right? Because comparing is so married with despairing. Compare and despair, those rhyme for a reason, I think. Because in the end, we know that the world we put, or that the face we put out there in our social media world, that's not the real us. It's just the best parts. And the most mundane, the normal parts of my life don't stack up. And I know that's actually not my real life and who I really am. And what's more, when I compare myself with the folks or the stuff other folks post, it doesn't ever match up either, because I know that the mundane moments of my life don't match up to how awesome everyone else's life seems to be, right? I'm not near as rich as other people. I'm not near as attractive. I'm not near as good looking as these other people, right? My kids aren't near as well behaved. The list could go on, right? I'm not near as successful. I'm not near as happy. And we get this double whammy of not only do we not really end up getting the affirmation we really long for, that we want to fill our hearts with from others, we also condemn ourselves because we realize our lives are actually not that awesome. So it's a double whammy. Can you relate to this in any way? Does your use of your phone and social media give greater expression to your heart tendencies towards jealousy and envy? I know mine can. Mine can. Do you live in a subtle social media rivalry with your friends? Do you compare and despair? Or perhaps worse, do you compare and think you're doing pretty great? Our smartphones are definitely influencing us in this area. We're far less prone to be kind and patient with others, but our Heavenly Father, the Scriptures teach us, He's really kind and really patient. He's willing to give Him Himself for our good. Are we training ourselves towards that or towards something else? So many of us are just bitterly unkind to ourselves and others, and we're training ourselves to be that way. Are our phones helping us abide more deeply in the vine of Christ? The source of kindness and patience, or something else? Just a few more here. How about peace and strife? Do your phones help you be more at peace, or do they lead you towards strife? Do you know what strife means? It's like grating against two things, like rubbing against each other. That's strife, gritting and grinding on each other. It can be within yourself, in comparison to others. Do your phones lead you towards peace or towards strife? So the studies are also pretty clear that the increased smartphone usage and increased social media usage leads completely and unequivocally towards increased anxiety and depression. Again, that's not even contested. Anxiety and depression. And it makes you less able to focus, less able to sleep at night. So anxiety and depression, those are types of strife. Those are internal ones. Does it lead you towards strife or towards peace? So most of us, we get up in the morning, and before we even wipe the sleep out of our eyes, before we pick up our scriptures and connect with the source of peace, God's main provision for peace in our lives, what do? I do. I'm checking my emails, my whatever, before I even am half awake, because my phone's right there, and I'm getting that hit first thing in the morning. I'm not getting it from the scriptures sometimes. I know you can. We've got unprecedented access to God's word through this thing. More than any time in all of history, you can find any version, any translation. You can find study notes. You can find reading plans. But are you? Is that what you're using it for? First thing in the morning? All right. This one we'll just say briefly, faithfulness versus idolatry and division. So faithfulness, this one's kind of talking more about like faithfulness in relationships, being a faithful friend. Does your phone lead you towards being a better friend, being more adept relationally? Or does it tend to divide us, put us more apart from one another? Again, the research is pretty clear. The more we use our smartphones, the more we use social media, the less our social skills improve. The more they're actually kind of going down over time. We're less able than ever to actually sit down and carry on a real conversation with someone in real time. The stats tell us that we're actually less likely, because of our smartphones, to take a real phone call or to call a friend. We actually will avoid that call because it makes us anxious. Because we can't control it. It's in real time, even though it's over a phone. We're less likely than ever to want to get together with a friend and connect in real life. All right, so our phones are affecting us. Our phones are affecting us. All right, let's look at one more as we close. How about the fruit of the Spirit is love, and the fruit of the flesh is sexual immorality? How do our phones amplify one or the other? It has potential for both. What do we see? So we're going to actually talk for a whole Sunday night about our sexuality here in a few weeks. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this one, but we have to talk a little bit about it. So the original word, the Greek word for sexual immorality is porneia. Porneia, that's where we get our word pornography. That's right. So sexual immorality, Porneia, it's nothing new. It's been around for a long time. You can find ancient pottery shards, and they've got inappropriate pictures on there. You find reliefs on walls from archaeological excavations. You find records of temple prostitution that was just the norm in societies in ancient world. So porneia is not new. It's nothing new. But never before in all of human history has so much raw sexual immorality been available to us so immediately and in such a seemingly private way for our consumption than through the mobile device. It is different. It is new. Indeed, it's being pumped for free into our homes, into our bathrooms, and into our kids' rooms. 11 is now the average age when kids are first exposed to porn, most of them through cell phones. 94% of our kids will see porn by the age of 14 through their cell phones, or likely through yours that they're using. Nearly half of young adults now say that they come across porno at least once a week, even when they're not looking for it, through their smartphones. And attitudes about porno and sex and sexual immorality is changing. It's now more acceptable than ever in our youth culture. Most teens are sexting, sending sexual explicit images through their phones, whether sending or receiving. 62% of our teens and young adults are doing that right now. And this stat blew me away. By far, teens and young adults now view not recycling as far more immoral than consuming porno. Wow, that's really different. So this stuff is just being pumped at us through our phones, and it's decimating us. A few more stats. 18 to 30-year-old men, in general, in our society, 18 to 30-year-old men, 80% of them view porno at least monthly. 80% of our men. That's our young men. 67% of 30 to 50-year-olds. That stat's pretty high. What about older folks, 50 to 70-year-olds? Still at 49% monthly. An increasing number of women. The stats for 18 to 30-year-olds is nearly identical now for men and women. Men are at 79%, women are at 76%, at least monthly looking for porno on their cell phones. 55% of married men, 55% of all married men, and 25% of married women look for porno at least monthly. Study after study shows how consumption of pornographic material unilaterally and significantly decreases our ability to have and enjoy a fulfilling sexual relationship with our real spouse. It's not even conflicted. That's why 56% of our divorces in America report at least one party having an obsessive interest in pornography. So porno is killing our love. It's killing our ability to love. It's killing our families. And it's coming now almost exclusively through our mobile devices. Are you catching what I'm putting out here? And it's even here in our churches. The stats aren't much different in our churches than they are outside of the church. Of young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds, 76% of young Christian adults admit to actively seeking out porno regularly. 76% of young adults. 68% of church-going men say they are viewing porno regularly. Over 50% of pastors report viewing porno on a regular basis on their cell phones. And the vast majority of them admit that struggling with porn is significantly affecting their ministry in a negative manner. So not only is porno killing our ability to love, it's not only killing our families and our marriages, but now it's killing our ministries. And that's perhaps maybe the most alarming stat we could put out. It's decimating our potential for ministry. So rather than abiding in the deep fount of satisfaction that is the vine of Christ, we're looking for that rotten fruit that we first found in the garden now more than ever, pumped at us in raw, unadulterated form through our cell phones. So those stats kind of speak for themselves. Really, we need to, these should, like it has for me, these should lead us to weep. I tell you, not only just because it's so alarming, but because, and the scriptures tell us this too, that anywhere that human beings are increasingly reduced to products, there's spiritual forces in the unseen realms behind it. They're using it. This is no longer just a value neutral thing. We're being used, not just by other people and corporations, although that's happening. Every click, every scroll is being monetized by corporations. They're monetizing you. It's happening. But there's also spiritual forces that are using it for your destruction and for our destruction. I think they're executing a clear plan. And they're coming to us through our cell phones. All right. So to end, what do we do about this? What do we do? Are we supposed to just chuck them and live completely off the grid? Well, the quick answer is not necessarily. I still have mine. That doesn't have to mean everything, but it's going to show us that the answer to this is going to be complex. It's a complicated answer. So we need to avoid overly simplistic and dogmatically narrow answers here, because the answers are going to be a little different from person to person. Use alcohol as an example. The scriptures are pretty clear. There's nothing wrong with alcohol. It can even be quite good. But some folks have a real problem with it because drunkenness is not good. So for some folks, they can put some boundaries in place so that alcohol can be used for good and not for bad. That happens for a lot of folks. For some folks, that's not an option for whatever reason. They can't even go there. So I think that the answer for all of us is going to be widely varied. It's going to be different. So we need to be careful offering overly simplistic answers, like I said, but it needs to start by us honestly and bravely assessing, how is this stuff affecting us? And where am I at with my use of my mobile device? At the end of the day, critical evaluation is what proves that we're not being mastered by our device. All right, so just a few suggestions here. Admit, first of all, that you're not exempt from the negative effects of your smartphone. You're not exempt. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to do something about it, but you're not exempt. That's the first step. Number two, we need to honestly, bravely assess how your use of your phone is affecting your ability to abide in the vine of Christ and to bear the fruit of good works. How is it affecting you? It's not nothing. How is it affecting you? Ask yourself tough questions and be willing to give the honest answer. Tough questions like, does my phone and my use of my phone and social media expose or amplify my jealousy or envy? Does it feed my need to compare? Does it feed my tendency? Does it give expression to my tendency to be harsh or angry with others rather than kind and patient? Does your use of your phone actually give you the rest that you think you're getting from it? So many of us take this out and I just need a moment to myself to relax and to enjoy. Pull up Netflix. Well, that's fine, but does it work? Does it really help you rest? After binge watching something on your phone or scrolling through Facebook for a few hours, are you actually more energized to relate to God and others? Or are you more anxious and depressed? Are you actually sapped of energy? Be willing to answer. How is my phone impacting my relationship with my spouse? With my kids? Be willing to ask the difficult questions. Next, remember the gospel. Remember the gospel. So, what's the gospel? We're going to just shout out a little bit. Someone say something. What's the gospel? Uh-oh, this thing's about to fall while I stick this up. Someone yell out something. If I asked you, what's the gospel? What would you say? Ooh, that's really good. Jesus died for my sins. That's exactly right. Jesus Christ died for my sins. You can do it on one hand. If you want to do the extra credit, you can throw in the other hand. Does anyone remember what the other 5 are? Christ died for my, I'm doing this back. Christ died, I can't do it. Christ died for my sins and rose from the dead. That's right. So not only can he offer me forgiveness for my sins, but he can also fill me with new life. It starts now and lasts forever. That's why Jesus came, because we're all so desperately in need of him. We're not new in our generation in that we're all desperately trying to fill that hole in our hearts, to find approval, to find life in something other than God. We're not new in that. That's been around since Adam and Eve. But we have a really powerful expression of our technology now that gives an amplified ability to our hearts to run somewhere else. But even now, remember the gospel for you. The Father has moved heaven and earth through the cross so that you can reconnect to the vine. And that's wonderful news. That's wonderful news. You're not alone. God wants to help you. He wants to help you also step into a life of producing good fruit for the blessing of others, the kind of life that really satisfies. And so it's not going to be about merely just resolving to change with our smartphones. First of all, we've got to recognize that we need God as the source of all the things we look for in here. And that's going to be the starting point. God can help us to change. Real change is possible. But only by placing ourselves firmly in grace can we take a step forward. So remember the gospel. And then consider setting some boundaries in place. Because this thing is exceedingly powerful. It's exceedingly powerful, both for good and for bad. And so as with anything exceedingly powerful, boundaries are normal. You know, if that picture of the saw up there, we're not going to use our buddy's back as a sawhorse, right? Just a common sense boundary. It's very powerful. Same thing with our phones. And so just a few suggestions on boundaries. These are not exhaustive, but these are a few that have been helpful to me. We won't spend a ton of time on them, but if you're looking for ideas, consider going through a detox, whether with your phone and or with social media. 21 days is a good number. And if the idea of stepping away from your phone for 21 days and going back to a dumb phone that you probably have in a drawer somewhere and you can reactivate it, if that idea sounds terrifying, you might be addicted to your phone. Something to consider. Minimize notifications. Go into your settings and turn off every app that can send you notifications, or turn off the notifications from those apps. Do you really need to know from Pinterest that you haven't been on Pinterest in 3 hours? Probably not. Turn off every notification that you don't absolutely need. Let's see, there we go. Use the do not disturb mode on your phone, especially if you're meeting with people, if you're having dinner with your family. Use that do not disturb button. And I would encourage you to set up the exceptions for double calls or favorites so that you know if there's an emergency, someone will get through. Your family will get through, or someone who calls twice, so that you're not constantly checking. It can be really useful. But everything else gets silenced for a while. Delay checking your notifications. This one's just like a discipline. So when you hear the ding or you feel the vibrate, don't check it right away. I mean, if you can. That one's pretty simple. No phone zones. This one has been really helpful to me. For some, no phone in the bathroom is a really good option. It's a time waster. It can be a place where pornography enters. For me, the big one was no phone in the bedroom. No phone in the bedroom, specifically no phone in the bed. No phone in bed. So if you need to use your phone for your alarm, just go to Walmart and get a $7 old school alarm clock. They still have them. If you absolutely have to use the one on your phone, do not plug it in by your bed. Put it across the room on your dresser. Plug it in over there. Don't have it easily accessible. You know, a little bit more boredom in the bedroom might not be that bad. And you're going to train yourself for some very good things. Hearing a few snickers there for the gospel and for marriages. The last one, get some accountability for porn. You don't have to already struggle with porn to get accountability, but if you do, you need to get it. So that really encompasses everybody. And it's not just for guys anymore. Get some accountability with porn. So this one's going to have to come in 2 layers. You're going to have to get some tech accountability. So that's like getting some software that filters and limits stuff. You need to get some. One I would really recommend is called Covenant Eyes. Covenant Eyes. There's a small monthly fee, but it's really good, really useful. A number of us here at Tallgrass use it. And also get some friends who can be your accountability group. Not friends that are going to just, like, if you share that you stumbled or struggled with something, they're going to be like, yeah, it's fine, we all struggle. That's not going to be overly helpful. You also don't want some friends that are going to just drill you with legalism. That's not the gospel either, but you want people who are going to be on your side to walk with you, to help you take steps of freedom, because freedom is possible in Jesus. It really is. So get a little bit of help. So just a few suggested boundaries. We'll have a few minutes here to ask you guys which ones you found helpful. One last one. Consider how to use your phone for good. Because we've been harping on a lot of the negative impacts because I think a lot of us are just zombified to them. Or we know them, but we don't know them. Or we forget, or we still do it anyway. There's a lot of dangers. This has a lot of potential for negative, but it has a lot of power for good. What might some of those be? Just a few suggestions. I use an app called Evernote for my prayer cards. If you don't know what a prayer card is, the book on the back table back there for $10 called A Praying Life has a lot of great suggestions about using prayer cards. I use an app, so they're always with me. What are a few others? What did I mention here? Let's see. I've lost my place. It's probably okay. Bible reading plans, like we said before. You can use a Bible reading plan. Studies show that if you read your Bible on your phone, your chances are you're going to read too fast and you're not going to retain it as well. But it also shows that if you use a Bible reading plan, a scheduled plan on your phone, you're more apt to stick with it than with a paper plan. Maybe you need to utilize that. Use your phone to set reminders to pray for someone. Don't just say, yeah, I'll pray for you, and then you forget and you never do. Set a reminder when you know that thing's going to happen and you pray for them, and then send them an encouraging text right then that said, I just prayed this for you. Or send an encouraging text to them when you know that they're far away and they need something. These things can really enhance our relationships. There were a few friends of mine recently that were deployed, and I had access to them through iMessage, just like they were in the next room. It was incredible. They were in a war zone, and I could ask them, how are you doing? I could send them encouraging texts. Let's use this for relationships and for good. I'm sure there's a lot more. And the final thought here is there's no indication that when Jesus comes back and all is said and done, and we're resurrected, and heaven and earth combined, and we're living our eternal lives like we're really looking forward to, there's no indication that that's going to be devoid of technology. I think it's going to be full of technology because it's just a natural expression of our creativity. But can you imagine what we might do when our minds are fully freed from sin? I mean, look what we've accomplished through our technology now with sin in the picture. Can you imagine, freed from sin, what we might do and accomplish for great good and for God's glory? I get excited about that. I get excited about some of the space travel possibilities. You can talk to me about that later. That might happen on the new earth. So consider how you might use your phone for good. A couple resources. I've already mentioned Covenant Eyes. I would encourage you to check that one out. Another book that I found useful in preparing this talk was a book called 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. It's from a Christian perspective. It's full of research, and it shows both the dangers and the positives. So I think that one's pretty timely. So we've got a few minutes, about 5 minutes for Q&A. I would love to hear from you. If you have a question, great. But more specifically, what have you found? Have you found your phone hindering your ability to abide in the vine or produce good works? What boundaries have you found helpful? And how have you used your phone for good? So let's not waste time waiting for the icebreaker. Someone throw up their hand. We'll get the mic to you. What have you found helpful? What have you experienced with your phone and social media?
I guess one question I have is if the stats say social media inherently leads to anxiety and depression, that's what I heard you say anyways. Mm-hmm. So are you essentially saying everyone should be off of that? And then what are the implications of that with marketing or just advertising, just the reality of society? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, I think that's an example of there's not a clear answer. I think we're going to have different answers on that one. Like, for example, for me, and as you know, like I've gone through that detox period with social media, and a while back I just decided this isn't a thing I'm going to choose to be in. I'm missing out on some stuff because of that. but that's something that I've chosen, and I think, at least for me, that it's been a good choice and helped me to really invest in relationships. I know that I'll let you could speak to your for yourself probably, but I know that you've used it for great good to connect with people, and many do. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, but you do need to ask yourself the hard question, probably with friends, with God.
Curious if others had thoughts on that. I mean, we all see each other's Facebook feed, right? So I didn't know if others had engagement with that too.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that no one has thoughts. Maybe they're just zombified.
So I always have thoughts, Dave, you know that.
I know, I love it.
So for me, social media specifically, it's a helpful tool in connection, but I definitely need to put some boundaries on it. Mm-hmm. So for example, with the adoption, we didn't put anything on social media until it was finalized because we could stalk people, potential birth dads that we didn't know what they were thinking. They could probably Facebook stalk us, right? And so we chose to put boundaries on that. But the reality was, because we didn't put a lot of information about the adoption on Facebook, there weren't as many people that were in the know. There were, old friends of ours from high school that are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, we didn't even know you were pregnant. We didn't know you were adopting, and now you have 2 babies. What's up, And so it is a valuable tool for connecting with people. But I think that, I need to be more intentional about boundaries with it. But I think that God definitely used it. For example, one of our neighbors that we lived next to or across the street from in Wamego, she saw it on Facebook and was like, oh my gosh, and then she called Christopher and wanted an update and this, and that. Would we have called her otherwise? She's not a believer. We tried really hard to keep that relationship alive, but it's hard now, and Facebook is a tool.
Yeah.
So.
I just a quick thought on that. I think that probably, like anything, a tool is powerful and can be used for good. My guess is that a lot of the negative impacts we're seeing in our society, the anxiety to the depression, is because we're using our tool incorrectly. We don't have a context for how to use this well and what it's not good for, what boundaries are helpful and what aren't. So I think that's a great word.
I was going to say something similar as well. I was off Facebook for a number of months, and I kind of had some FOMO that I had to work through. But I also realized that I was missing out on events in our community that were being posted, and had I not been intentional about asking Ben about certain things, I wouldn't have known that a lot of these events happen. And so in some ways it's I can't be completely off the grid if I'm going to be involved in community. Yeah. And so I think that, just like you're saying, not to, belabor it, but yes, it's a tool that needs to be used well, and there is a learning curve as well, and I think that involves some boundaries. So,
yeah, I think that's right.
Something that I experienced firsthand that I don't think that we think about a lot. We're talking about, if we treat the phone addiction similar to alcoholism. Mm-hmm. If we were all having a beer, we wouldn't harp and criticize someone else for not having a
That's
drink.
Right.
If we understood that they had an addiction issue, and I know at one point I still had a flip phone, and everyone's like, Chris got a flip. Chris, you can't get GroupMe on your flip phone. Oh man, we got to get GroupMe, man. It's all you got. You need to get a smartphone, Chris. And I did. And I guess what I'm saying is I think that there's a little bit of something lost there in how are we catering to people who are willingly putting these boundaries by way of limiting their technology in general. I think something's actually being lost and overlooked there.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out something important, that if we, one of the ways we bear with one another in love is recognizing, like we would with alcoholics. If there's an alcoholic in your group, you're not going to push them to have a drink. You understand. So we need to bear with one another in love for their good. Maybe time for one more, and then we'll end.
I like what you said there about bearing with one another in love, because sometimes I'm the guy who's pushing people and I get frustrated because it's hey, there's great ways to communicate with a lot of people, and if you're the one person that can't get it, but then you think about it, I think that the example you gave is good. So it's a one way to bear if someone's making those hard decisions to limit. The other thing I was thinking about was how our technology is advancing so rapidly, which you highlighted, that we can't evaluate it quick enough.
Yeah.
Because so like social media, of course you put the best stuff online. That doesn't inherently mean that you're trying to fabricate something. It's just like you put the best picture on your wall. You know, but the thing is with technology, it's so rampant. Like it used to be you walk into someone's house and you see their wall, and then you have that comparison issue, but you have time to evaluate it. But now you're just in bed scrolling through everyone's...
Hundreds of them.
Yeah, and so I think that's the thing that's so hard is to push pause and to evaluate and take time like you're encouraging us.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's a complicated question. At the end of the day, your cell phone is this, and it isn't. I know that was not overly clear, but we need to honestly evaluate these things. All right, I really appreciate your engagement. I think there's probably more that we could talk about with this, and I would love to. I'd like to go ahead and invite the band up, and we'll end with singing to God. And the songs that we're going to sing specifically, I think, connect with a settled choice to continue to put God first as the vine, to seek to be in the vine. And then when we put God first in his right place, our tech tends to lock in its appropriate place.
This teaching was recorded at Tallgrass Community Church. Because God first loved us, we exist to love God and love our neighbors. For more resources like this, visit tallgrass.church.